The Russians, and by extension the Soviets, have always loved their rocket artillery going back to World War II. They made the first self-propelled MLRS, the BM-13 Katyusha, and it served them pretty well. Today, Russian systems focus a bit more on accuracy than just the overwhelming firepower of World War II, but rocket artillery is still a staple of the Russian military, and widely used across its units in Ukraine. It can greatly reduce your enemy's morale and throw them into disorganization and take cover, making it an important weapon to use before launching an attack. With this in mind, and being that I've never looked into Russian MLRS storage numbers, with huge help from Jompy, we put together a complete detailed look at both pre-war and current MLRS in storage using the latest satellite imagery available. And let's face it, it's virtually impossible to get accurate and unbiased information these days, which is one of the big reasons I love satellite imagery and making these counting videos. The images are unbiased and don't lie, unlike having to rely upon reports and news stories, which transitions perfect into our sponsor. Ground News is a website and app that gathers related articles from thousands of sources around the world so you can compare how different outlets cover the same story. Each story comes with a very clear breakdown of the political bias, factuality, ownership, and headlines of the reporting sources, with ratings backed by independent news monitoring organizations. But instead of doing a boring explanation, let's look at an actual story to see how it works. Here, for example, Ground News shows this story has been covered by 215 sources, 33% of them leaning left and 19% leaning right. On the left, Castor's Advance presents the headline, Lebanon says at least 24 people have been killed in an airstrike in the south. By highlighting the number of deaths, it shifts the attention to the humanitarian impact of the conflict. Then on the right, Legal Insurrection's headline is more assertive. After eliminating Nasrallah, Israel hunting for remainder of Hezbollah's leadership. So it shows how different outlets can shape the perception of the same event, either focusing on the humanitarian consequences or military objectives. And what a lot of people, including myself, really like is the blind spot feed. It really helps to give you a view into what each side is either ignoring or highlighting to try to shape the narrative, which again makes Ground News incredibly valuable in my opinion. I've had it on my phone for years because, unfortunately, not all news and information out there can be as clear and unbiased as satellite imagery. So go to ground.news/covertcabal or scan my QR code to subscribe today for 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use for unlimited access to all their features. I think Ground News is doing important work and I hope you'll check them out. The three main MLRS systems being used by Russia is the BM-21 Grad, BM-27 Uragan, and BM-30 Smerch. The Grad is the oldest, in service since the early 1960s, but it's still an effective weapon. It can launch rockets with warheads ranging from high explosive to smoke to mines, out some 45 kilometers depending on the rocket variant. All 40 of its rockets can be fired in just 20 seconds. It's not the most accurate, but then again, rocket artillery isn't really designed for accuracy. These are designed to be fired in large numbers simultaneously and destroy an enemy spread out over a larger area. The later mid-70s Uragan and late 80s Smerch carry less, but larger and more accurate rockets. Rocket artillery does have its downsides though. The fact that it's a rocket means it typically doesn't have much flexibility in range. Unlike shell artillery, it has to burn until its fuel is gone. And if the enemy is within minimum range, then it's pretty much useless. It can't fly that short. And its low accuracy means that even in large volleys, it's possible it won't hit anything. It's extremely effective against troops out in the open, but most troops don't just stand out in the open. Also, the huge number of rockets needed can also strain logistics. The global trend in recent years has shifted more to less but extremely accurate rockets, such as a MLRS, and they've gotten to a point where they're more like short-range ballistic missiles than the classic rocket artillery. That being said, Russia still loves them, and uses them widely. And it's hard not to want overwhelming firepower when you're on the front lines and dealing with enemy attacks. In many ways, it's more of a psychological or morale-changing weapon, a booster for those who are firing it, and devastating the morale of those on the receiving end. With all that said, let's take a look at what they have left in storage depots. We've identified 22 different storage bases that held MLRS before the war began. These held a total of 1,474 systems. Today, just 10 bases have any remaining, and the largest, the 109th, accounts for roughly 50% of all stored MLRS. And we got real lucky being able to get a real recent image of the base from this month, especially since it's the largest. Of the 517 that were here pre-war, only 169 remain today. You can see large sections mostly gone, and here MLRS have been replaced mostly with towed artillery. Another important one is the 8th. This is the second largest today, with just 54. Before the war began, there were 146, and the latest imagery we could get was from over a year ago. We tried hard to get newer, but no luck. So in the time since, it's likely dropped even more than that. And really, those are the only two important bases. They alone consist of nearly 2/3 of all remaining MLRS. A couple others that are now completely empty by contrast: Novaya Stanica, the 22 BM-21s that were here pre-war have now disappeared. Another is Lesnoy Gorodok. This had 76, but now 0 remain. This base has a wide mix of vehicles, and it can be hard to differentiate between trucks and transloaders from MLRS, but I'll get to that later. The BM-27s here though are much easier to ID, and now only the support vehicles and those that have had their rocket pods removed remain. So in grand total, they have just 339 MLRS remaining in storage. That's a huge drop from the pre-war 1,474, so just 23% remain. And those that do remain are almost all likely in poor condition as well, some worse than others. So at this point, they are realistically quickly approaching 0. And then here is the breakdown by type and base, along with the data the satellite imagery used. And Jompy, who did countless hours of grinding work so we can have this chart here. He will be posting a thread with more and different details on Twitter. Of course, and I've seen a lot of people ignore this fact, but if and when they run out in storage, that does not mean they will have 0. According to Ukraine, in February 2024, Russia had some 1,130 MLRS in active service, and there's also still several currently being repaired and upgraded at factories. And there's also the sometimes strange and unique improvised MLR systems that are being used on both sides, just in an attempt to try to keep their firepower up at the front. Ukraine here, for example, has shown off things like this destroyed Russian BM-21 Grad, which they have then used to make their own improvised systems. And we've seen even stranger Russian videos where they've placed naval RBU-6000 anti-submarine rockets on top of vehicles to use on land. So MLRS aren't just going to disappear anytime soon, but these improvised systems are obviously nowhere near as effective or accurate as purpose-built and tested systems. And finally, a few notes on challenges and Russian production, and whether they can keep up. One difficulty is, in satellite imagery from above, a lot of MLRS look a lot like trucks. The average person, including myself and Jompy before doing all this, couldn't tell the difference. But after looking at them for long enough, they become easier to spot. Also, since they normally stay in the same space, other older but higher resolution imagery, or even sometimes imagery from different times in the year, the different sun angles will help create different shadows and illuminate different parts that make them more recognizable. So while they may look the same as other nearby vehicles, to the best of our ability, we've been able to differentiate and ID them all. You'll also notice we only have 3 types of systems: the BM-21 Grad, BM-27 Uragan, and BM-30 Smerch, while Wikipedia lists 8 different systems. And you might have also heard about others and wonder why we haven't listed them, like the TOS-1 or Tornado. Well, Russian MLRS are a bit confusing. There are a lot of different variants, and again, even the improvised versions out there. The Tornado G and Tornado S are really just modernized and upgraded versions of the BM-21 and BM-30. And here you can see the G and the BM-21 are virtually identical. The TOS-1 is actually a flamethrower and stands for Heavy Flamethrower, but we haven't seen any in storage anyway. And actually, one extra challenge we've had is that there were some MLR systems in storage without rocket pods, as HIMARS mentions here. So the question becomes whether or not to count them, or are they just being scrapped for their pods and other parts to use on other systems? Also, there are several systems at repair plants. Waffenträger here has a great thread on several, including this one here. We don't add these in the count though, as our logic is that they've already been pulled from storage to be repaired or modernized to be used. And Russia is also increasing production of new MLRS as well. A recent Kiel report showed here a 153% increase per quarter since Q4 of 2022. However, it's also important to note that it estimates 80% of those are rebuilt from storage. So there is some ambiguity. But even in the best case scenario for Russia, none of it makes up for the massive decline we see. If 80% of the 38 mentioned here in Q2 of 2024 are from storage, that means less than 8 new built ones per quarter. The rate storage numbers are shrinking since pre-war is over 103 per quarter. So if that rate holds, that means Russia would have to increase its rate of new built MLRS systems by roughly 1,300% just to stop the depletion. And with its usefulness in suppressing your enemy before you attack, without it, it'll become more difficult for Russia to advance.